I am convinced that the word of the Lord does not return void. That's because that's what the scriptures themselves say, that when the word of the Lord is proclaimed, when the word of the Lord is read, that it is the very words of God, and those words have an effect in our world, in our souls, in our lives. And so this morning, I'm not doing a full sermon. I'm not doing a full proclamation of the gospel. I'm simply reading through these two stories from the Gospel of Mark. And then I'll do a brief reflection on two ideas from the text as it relates to our Serve Table Sunday, which is really turning into Giving Table Sunday. So any kids out there who are doing coloring pages, the stories are Jesus feeding the 5,000 and Jesus walking on water. So if you want to color a picture that reflects Jesus feeding 5,000 men and then in addition women and children, you probably won't be able to color all of the people, but that's okay. If you want to do a coloring page, that's great. And if there's some reason your parents would rather you do that later, that's fine as well. Any adults out there who are doing a coloring page, I hope you enjoy being creative like your creator was in creating you. In any case, let me read the text for us this morning, because the word of the Lord does not return void. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of him. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than a half year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, "5 and 2 fish." Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran through that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even his cloak, the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. This is the word of the Lord. So what we've just seen in this passage is that Jesus is not wanting people to be left hungry. Is that the main point of this passage? Perhaps not, but it is definitely a true point. These people are hungry, and he doesn't want them to go hungry, to get weak, to run into a situation where they don't have enough. As we pray in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, that's what they needed. They needed their daily bread, their bread for that day. They needed to be sustained. And so when the time came, the disciples could only see one option. They realized that if the people stayed longer and listened to Jesus teach, that they would get too hungry. They would not have anything to eat. And so they said to Jesus, send them away. That was the only option they could see. That happens to all of us at times in life, where we only see one option, where other options may be available. But Jesus said to them something very interesting. He didn't say, I am going to provide all that they need. I am going to do a miracle. He said, you give them something to eat. And I find that to be very interesting because what they had to give didn't seem significant. 5 loaves and 2 fish. But that's what God wanted to do. That's what Jesus wanted them to do. He wanted them to see that they could give of what they had. And that's important for us today in this time, that for those of us who do have, whether we feel rich or not, if we have the opportunity to give of what we have and then allow God to use it for his purposes. In this case, it was to multiply the fish and the bread and to create enough for people to have their daily bread, their daily sustenance. And it was an amazing miracle. But right in here is also something amazing, that God would want us to give of what we have. And so for today, I wanted to direct us to the website. If you go up to the upper right-hand corner of the website, you can see that there are ways to give. At this moment, I'm forgetting what the tab is actually called. Supporting the mission, that's what it's called. And anything that is given through the website today, designated to table, anything from now through the end of April, will be given into the benevolence fund, which will then be distributed to those in need. So just wanted to be able to direct you there, that that's where you go in order to donate of what you have. So that was the first point I wanted to bring out. But as I was reading this yesterday, I read through the section of Jesus walking on the water. And it says here that in verse, I should have found this before, should I have not? This is like it's live with me, just getting a little bit distracted live. It's like we're all together. Okay. Verse 52, right before that, at the end of 51. Jesus climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. What had they not understood about the loaves? Why does he say their hearts were hardened? Because they were so forgetful, because they may have been seeing him as a miracle worker, like a David Blaine or a David Copperfield, someone who's able to do a sleight of hand, who's able to do a magic trick, who's able to do some cool things, but who they obviously had not put their full trust in. Just that day, they had received plenty of food. They had experienced and witnessed a miracle of God in Jesus, the very bread of life, because that's who he is, providing for those who are in need. And now they completely forgot about the loaves. They didn't forget about the loaves. They hadn't understood about the loaves. That this was Jesus's way of showing that he is the Messiah. He is the King. He is the one who is their sustenance and their hope. And that he is the one who will look out for them in the land of the living and beyond. So during this season that we're in, this time when we have to be away from one another physically, let's remember together that Jesus cares about the poor, and we have the opportunity to care for those who need their daily bread. And as we help those who need their daily bread, let's remember for ourselves and to proclaim to others that he himself is the bread of life.